let me throw just another question or two. Warner Brothers signs you, the album comes out, and really and truly, it did take off.
No, absolutely. I think that Tab Rex, who put out the independent EP that, I sold to Warner's, the Guitars Cadillac's LP, it was a 12-inch, six-song LP, came out in '84. I think it sold about 30,000 units, which was a lot for a record that had no distribution, and it was in Chicago, written up here, of course, in L.A., and then it was written up at the Chicago Sun-Times and New York and the East Village Eye, which is an equivalent to the L.A. Weekly. And Bob Claypool found us down in Houston, Texas, when we went down with the Blasters and performed a show down there in Houston, and then back over at, oh my Lord, Brantley, I just thought about that drive with that Cadillac, that 61 Cadillac, pulling a trailer, and the windshield wiper came off near Van Horn, Texas. I don't know if you remember this. Pete was driving. I was in the back seat trying to sleep because we didn't have money for motels, nothing. We were just trying to get to Houston, drove straight through from L.A. to get to Houston, pulling a trailer, and Jeff, Dom, and J.D. were in one of the others, like little Mitsubishi station wagon or something, following us, like gripped the wheel. Brantley was in the front seat, and we were overheating near Wilcox, Arizona. It blew like a water pump or something. And so Pete and Brantley were in the front seat driving, and this is in the summer, across I-10 with the heater going. I looked over at one point, Brantley, I thought Brantley was dead. He looked like a monk who had set himself on fire in the front seat. He had shorts on, khaki shorts, and was sitting like this. Just, like, it was, we had the windows down, but we got to near Van Horn, Texas, and one of those West Texas thunderstorms started happening. It rained so hard it blew the windshield wiper off of that 61 Cadillac. So we pulled into a truck stop. They didn't have any wipers for that car. And they took the wiper off of the passenger side and put it on the driver's side. Do you remember that? And it would wipe off the windshield while we were going. And that's how we drove the next 3 hours on the way to San Antonio, which is where we stopped and had whatever bit of breakfast we could afford at a Denny's, and went on into Houston. We made it in time. Literally, we may have gotten half a sound check, and that's how close we got there, and played with the Blasters there. Then we played with them again, and Claypool wrote about us after that show. So it was a series of things that started to build a national awareness. We also were taken with the Blasters again to the Ritz in New York City, and played there in the spring before the Warner LP would come out at the end of, the beginning of '86. In '85 we went there with the Blasters. But it was on the way back through, we stopped in Austin and played the Opry House on that trip. And the Blasters took us to both gigs with them. And Paige Rowden and I believe Martha Sharp came down from Warner Brothers. They'd heard about this upstart hillbilly thing that was going on in L.A., and particularly they'd come across the EP, that six-song LP that we had put out on Oak, and which was a label that was loaned to me to use because Ray Ruff, the record producer, who had been involved with Dot Records and then Curb Records, and had actually had a lot to do with Debbie Boone's big hit, You Light Up My Life. And so he had a hillbilly label, or country label, Oak Records. And so his sister happened to work at that P&D company. And they loaned us the label, the imprint. So put that out, and Paige had come across the record and came down there, flew into Austin to watch us perform. Because prior to that, I'd opened for Nick Lowe at the Palace, the old Palace on Vine Street right up here in Hollywood. And RCA Records had come out to see if they were interested in signing. They said, I don't know. They said, it's awfully rock and roll. What we were doing, it was just, Bill Monroe starts the set. It's like, well, how's that rock and roll? Other than, Bill Monroe was rock and roll before there was rock and roll. And Paige and Martha came down there, and Paige went back to Nashville after seeing us. and demanded that the Nashville division sign us. Jim Ed Norman said, hey, if you feel that strongly about it, sign him. And Lenny Waronker gave me sound advice. I couldn't have landed at a better record label than Warner Brothers in 1985. Still under the guidance of Mo Austin and Lenny Waronker, two of the great record men ever. They treated artists with dignity and respect. The Warner record label legacy is all about that. Was at one time. You know, all record labels have changed. I mean, they're down to 3 of the majors left. But when I think about it, and you mentioned the Slash record, you know, kind of query, you know, again, I was taken in there, and you were championing me being signed by Slash, and Bob wisely said, it's not for us to handle, it's somebody else, because I was straddling, you know, both sides of that fence. So, yes, things immediately took off. That little 6-song LP that did when we put out Honky Tonk Man, its first track.
Well, here's my last question about the first album. What did it feel like when it got to be so successful? What did you feel inside when all that happened, Dwight? Because it'd been a long road for you.
Blurry, because you don't realize it's happening, because records take time. It's not like a movie that opens over a weekend. I said it to some actor friends of mine one time. I said, you know, somebody that had just been in something that really made him famous, you know, literally over a wide opening weekend. You know, it was a big movie that opened nationwide, and I said, well, it's different. I said, it was different for me. I said, because it took, the single came out, it's 12 weeks, 14 weeks for Honky Tonk Man to get on the charts and go all the way to the top 5. So when Chris Hillman and I talked about the Byrds and that 3-month build-up that they played as a house band at I think Ciro's, and he told me about it slowly built there live. You know, Warren Beatty would come in and bring a table of people, and Marlon Brando, which he said, so we were kind of, by the time we broke nationally, we were kind of nonplussed. Mr. Tambourine Man was climbing the charts, and it was that way for us and for me. It was slow. And then we got on a bus and didn't come home for 10 months, and it almost killed all of us, Brantley included. There was one instance at the end of that first tour. Do you remember Pete decided they had a wooden dash on that bus? They had barnwood. If you remember this, and he took a lock blade knife to amuse him to pass the time. 10 months. We didn't come back to L.A. He was throwing that lock blade knife just to see it stick in the wood dash. You know, we were toward the end at that point of that first year. And J.D. and Pete both chose to, you know, pursue things the next year that were, you know, Pete was off into producing, and J.D. actually started producing and left the band. Brantley stayed with me. With David Jackson came out with us that year and roomed with Brantley to, I think, to Brantley's delight. David's an affable and entertaining man and a brilliant musician. I mean, one of the great bass players ever. Came out of, I mean, he was one of the, I think, the founding members of the Dillard and Clark expedition, right? One of the early offshoots of the Byrds. So it was kind of fuzzy how it happened. You felt it happening. It was on the radio. You know, you heard. There was a video that was getting played on, at that time, the Nashville Network and MTV, early until we started to have a hit. And then we were no longer allowed, you know, the MTV didn't want to, you know, a commercial country radio act being played there. Now, Much Music in Canada played me all the way through my, you know, most of my career. But it was, if you listen to the Roxy show that we recorded that night in April of '86, you'll hear that band, those 4 musicians and myself, at the precipice of something. You know, we knew there was something. We'd signed with Warner, gone in and done the Warner recordings, and the record was about to come out. And there was anticipation.
Okay.
And a hesitancy to feel there was a realization. You know, the record business music was a longer, you know, simmer to boil.
Well, I'm not sure when this falls in that timeline, but I do remember coming home one day to the house. We were in the basement, and you lived in the garage, and you were gone. So I figured He's on the road to success because it was a garage, I think, painted black.
That was a little before we actually finally started to break. But yes, that was the beginning of that was a turn. That was a turning point.